Desfrute do novo Icon of the Seas da Royal Caribbean agora partindo de Miami. É o ícone das férias repleto de atrações, com o maior parque aquático no mar e espetáculos sensacionais da Broadway. Com destinos incríveis no Caribe, incluindo a premiada ilha particular Perfect Day at Coco Cay, a aventura nunca acaba. Icon of the Seas, as melhores férias em família do mundo. Acesse royalcaribbean.com/BRA. Aplicam-se termos e condições.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock show. It's time for Common Sense. Now, it's Cats and Cosby with John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby, standing for truth, justice, and the American way, bringing common sense to the world. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby.
When you're a jet all the way from your first cigarette to your last dying day.
Well, when you're a jet, West Side Story. Anybody know when that's from? Well, you're sitting down. September 1957, 67 years ago today. Those days, it was the Jets, the gangs on the street. Well, now, the gangs are still on the street, but it's a different gang. In the studio with us, we have Judge Richard Weinberg, and we have George Venizelos, the head of the FBI for New York for 4 years. And, Curtis, what gangs do we have on the street right now? I understand 75, 50, or 75.
75. That's what they say. 75. That's what they say.
Nobody certifies.
That's true. I will give you that.
Anywhere from 50 to 75% of the arrests are migrants.
Yes, in Midtown.
Pulling your hair. Don't get your hair done, otherwise they're going to pull it.
Don't want that.
All the important places, right? Right by Penn Station, Times Square, Midtown. 75% of the arrests, migrants.
Oh, wait, don't say that. Don't say that, according to John. Go ahead.
Mostly gangbangers from Venezuela, Ecuador. And now what's happened is because you have so many gangbangers from South America, the North Africans form their own gangs to protect themselves from the Venezuelans and Ecuadorians, so it's jet sharks, but circa 2024.
So, 67 years ago, we had the Jets.
Yes.
And now who do we have?
Oh, well, you got so many gangs out there. In fact, the Venezuelans have, like an amoeba, split in half. They're warring against one another. So you have Venezuelan gangs battling Venezuelan gangs for turf, for drugs, prostitution. An example, an Ecuadorian gangbanger. He saw some clothes. He walks into a store. He's wearing nice new clothes. 2 days. He takes all of his clothes off in front of everybody, changes, puts on the clothes. The cops catch him. They said, Midtown South, what were you doing? I said, I was tired. 2 days of those clothes. I know here in America, I can take clothes and I'm not going to do any time for this.
And by the way, what about MS-13? And what's going on with sort of the turf wars?
Oh, well, remember, they're embedded out in Brentwood, Central Islip. But Trump and our own Peter King and Jeff Sessions at the time went out there and told everybody, you better work with ICE. I don't care what the Governor Cuomo says. You work with ICE. And they got MS-13 under control. Before that, MS-13 was luring young...
Let's talk about sanctuary cities.
Yes.
Why? Does anybody out there say we should have sanctuary cities? George, you were with the federal government for 26 years, 27 years. Sanctuary city, who made this up?
Well, what it is destroying the cities. It's become a safe haven. It's a safe haven for the illegal migrants that are here.
The imported... migrants or the imported criminals that we have.
Right, they're getting covered.
The fact of the matter is, there's no such thing under the law, under the Constitution, as a sanctuary city. So any city government, county government, or governor who says they're a sanctuary jurisdiction is lying to you, is acting unlawfully, and they should be removed from office.
Wait a second. You were a judge for 15 years, Supreme Court judge in New York. Do we have a law on sanctuary cities or we don't?
Oh, thank Bill de Blasio for that. He not only passed that law with city council, he enhanced it so that ICE cannot go to courts. They cannot go to correctional facilities. They cannot go to precincts. They have to depend on the city to contact them when they're ready to release an illegal alien who's committed a crime, and the city will not do it.
Judge Weinberg, hang on.
No, the whole thing is totally preposterous. There's an obligation of local government authorities to cooperate with ICE. It's as simple and not at all complicated. They have an obligation to do it, and if they're not doing it, they should be removed from office because they're breaking their oath of office to take care of the laws being faithfully executed.
I mean,
they're using it as cover.
Let me ask George Venizelos. If there's a law that violates federal authorities, and and the law was made up by Barney Fife and Mayberry.
Right. Go
you have to follow them?
No, the federal laws should be able to follow. We should trump a lot of the local laws.
So why are we not? Why are we
I
not?
think the problem is that they're not.
It's an enforcement
the police aren't able to give the migrants or the people arrested to the federal authorities for some reason.
Right.
The federal authorities should be able to go on their own and pick them up.
Yeah, and they're saying we can't.
You know?
They're saying
remember,
we can't.
Trump challenged that with San Francisco. He said, I'm not sending any more federal dollars there because you're a sanctuary city. Right. They went to court. They won against Trump.
You know why? California courts. It was a California court, a far left bench out there. U.S. District Court and a Ninth Circuit, they're far left. They wouldn't do it. Trump was absolutely right.
Absolutely.
And they should be, and again, people forget about not giving them money. They should be removed from office.
And where they're going to Midtown, where our tourism.
Right.
They're hitting our tourism.
Times Square,
tourism.
We've always
and we
heard,
all, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. Remember what Times Square was back then? It's going to get back to that soon. If
Now, the big story of the day, last week, the Kennedy family went against RFK. This week, the Walz family, the entire family, went against the vice presidential candidate, Walz.
By the way, we have a little music also. Here we go. And, I'm looking at the picture. Can you imagine the family reunion?
Was that a dozen people?
Is that Thanksgiving dinner?
Yeah, and they're all wearing We Love Trump T-shirts. And the brother, by the way, John, also the brother of Walz, again, the running mate choice for Kamala Harris, says, I would not let my brother anywhere near the White House. He doesn't have the character. He doesn't have the this.
Rita, could that have anything to do with his links to China?
It could.
How many trips did he make to China?
30 trips.
Don't forget,
30 trips.
What about, it's a love story. Remember his anniversary is Tiananmen Square.
Tiananmen Square.
I mean, come on. And this is, as we're talking about sanctuary cities, this is the guy who also supports having a ladder to go over any border wall, emptying out detention centers, George. That is and you want him in the White House?
Didn't he let Minneapolis burn? People were killed.
That's right.
Maybe those 30 trips influenced him somehow.
$500 million lost.
We have a good friend on the phone waiting for us.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Michael Goodwin of the New York Post. Michael, you want to chime in on this discussion? We're going to get to Israel in a moment, but first, your thoughts about crime in New York, and also it's sort of the urban nightmares we were talking about, these random crimes too.
Well, listen, Rita, I mean, I completely agree that it's insane that the migrants effectively get out of jail cards every time they get arrested because of the sanctuary city status. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with them just being here illegally, but when they commit a crime, that's when that protection kicks in. That's my understanding. That they're not turned over to the to ICE, to the feds, who would be able to deport them. They are therefore free to commit crimes, and we already have a weak criminal justice system in New York. So when they get out of jail or released, more likely, there's no further concern for them. I mean, that's just not right. Look, the whole idea of immigration was always based on what was good for the country. Yes, of course, it was humane for the people wanting to come here. But as Michael Mukasey and others have said, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. And there was no requirement on the government to allow in criminals or people who have become wards of the state or any terrorist possibilities. All of that has been thrown overboard by just opening the gates. And we don't even know who these people are. They get here, they commit crimes, and then in these cities, they're not even turned over unless it's a murder case. In some cases, in some serious felonies, the city does allow them to be turned over, or at least it did under Michael Bloomberg. I think Bill de Blasio erased much of that, but that's something that Eric Adams doesn't even seem to be interested in.
Yeah, they don't even want to focus on it. It seems like it is like let's ignore it and hope it goes away. And it also goes all the way to the White House. They're not talking about it either. I mean, and she keeps flipping and flopping. I can't wait to see what she says next week in the debate.
Well, look, these are people who have lived with government paid security all their adult lives, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And so they never have to worry about crime. Think about that. Think about the beauty of growing up in San Francisco, Washington, anywhere, and not having to worry about crime. Just think about how much time the rest of us spend worrying and thinking about crime, how many decisions we make for ourselves, our children, our family about crime, how often it comes up in conversation. For them, it's not an issue. And I do believe that plays a major role in their callousness about how other people have to deal with crime and criminals.
I think it has to do with philosophy, because the minute you start talking about, say if we're talking about migrant crime, it goes to the border. The minute you talk about why is this other guy out, it's the recidivism rate. So I think a lot of it is they don't want to shine a light on policies. They don't talk about fentanyl either, because guess what? It goes back again to the border.
Right. And there is this kind of bleeding heart mentality that every criminal is just misunderstood, that somehow it's society's fault for not making a better life for that criminal, and therefore the crime is not as important, and the victim is not as important, and the victim's sense of security doesn't matter as much as we have to help get this criminal into a positive frame of mind about his or her future and make them part of society. I mean, they want to close the prisons. I mean, you hear what they say, and sometimes it feels like it's being said for effect. No. They're deadly serious that too many people are in prison. Well, I would argue not enough people are in prison.
Yeah, I agree with you. Judge Weinberg.
First, Michael, let me say amen to what you just said. I'm all for putting these people who are threats to other human beings in jail and keeping them in jail. And then when they finish their term, then you deport them. Just don't deport them. Let them stay in prison for the full term, and then you deport them. And that's how I used to do business when I was on the bench. Next, let's switch gears. You had a great column in the Post. You're talking about Biden and Harris administration throwing Israel under the bus. Would you tell our listeners what you're talking about?
Well, it has to do with, of course, the execution murders of the 6 hostages, one of them an American citizen. And Joe Biden, in the wake of that, again, he's a guy been on the beach. You can't get to him, doesn't answer questions. The one question a reporter was able to get through to him when he came back to the White House was, from a distance, the reporter shouted, "Do you think Netanyahu is doing enough to get a ceasefire?" And Biden said no. Now, again, in the context, it's an absolutely crazy question. But the answer was out of this world nuts. I mean, how can you, at that moment, blame the Israeli prime minister when the American officials have admitted that it's been Hamas that has turned down every deal offered since that first couple of prison hostage releases. And yet here you have Hamas murdering hostages, probably tortured them beforehand and after holding them for nearly a year. And the president doesn't talk about Hamas. He talks about the prime minister of Israel.
Well, they've been trying to get rid of Netanyahu for years, Michael.
That's it. All the Democrats hate Netanyahu, and that's presumably why he's been the longest-serving prime minister in Israel's history. Look, he's not perfect, and Israel itself is not perfect. But you cannot, at this moment, look at Israel and blame it for what Hamas is doing. I mean, as Netanyahu correctly said, this just gives Hamas more incentives to hold out, to take more hostages, because they'll be rewarded with the United States and Great Britain and others in Europe putting more pressure on Israel to make more concessions. So is the plan here, as Biden often says, to end Hamas, or is it to preserve Hamas? Because certainly, by demanding concessions from Israel, you are giving Hamas no reasons to surrender, no reasons to release the remaining hostages, of which there are thought to be about 60 who are still alive, including a handful of Americans. And do you ever hear Joe Biden talk about them?
No.
I mean, this is a form of appeasement that never works anywhere, and yet this is Joe Biden's approach.
Yeah, and boy, is it a perilous and dangerous one, as you're pointing out. Michael Goodwin, we love you. Thank you for joining us, Michael. We always love having you here on the show.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And joining us now, we have the great investigative journalist, Peter Schweizer, of course, wrote Blood Money. And hosts the Drill Down also podcast. And Peter, let's get first off, I want to ask you about China, but I also want to get to this other wild news that came down just a little bit ago. We heard from Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, and he comes out and says, you know what, we're looking into Russian disinformation in the 2024 election. Somehow we left out the 51 intel agents that seemed to help Hunter Biden and Joe Biden a lot in the last term.
Yeah, it's kind of 2016, isn't it? You know, we've heard this script before. Look, I mean, Russia is going to try to do things to manipulate the election. But what they're forgetting here is that the big player now, and the FBI has acknowledged this. The Wall Street Journal had a front page piece over the weekend. The big player in this election is China, as far as foreign powers are concerned. And they have a massive effort online disinformation. They absolutely prefer the Biden administration to the Trump administration. And yet the White House is focusing on Russian disinformation. They're focusing, I think, on sort of the minor threat and leaving the big one out of the picture because, again, they are politicizing intelligence. They're not giving the full a picture of what's going on, and they're choosing to focus on one part of the intelligence assessment which favors them politically in their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We have George Venizelos, also a former New York FBI here, the head of it there for many years. George?
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, right now, China is the biggest threat against us right now, followed by Iran. The Russians they're dealing with a war that they're dealing with now. You know, they have their own problems in their country. And
George, I think President Biden has given China a pass and Iran a pass as, Iran is guilty as sin. They're the ones that hired the terrorists.
Right.
And China seems to be doing whatever they want. They're trying to attack the Philippines now, and they've laid off Taiwan. I don't know. What say you?
The problem we have now, we're playing catch up. China's been doing this for years, many years, decades. You know, they've been, trying to influence. They have a lot of money they spend in this country. They buy politicians. They influence the way of life. I wouldn't put it past me if the sanctuary city stuff is all part of them influence, the politicians to think this way, to try to destroy this country. It's crazy.
Peter, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think George is exactly right, and John as well. I mean, look, China is the senior player here, and the fact of the matter is that China and Russia, in a way, are joined at the hilt, but China's the senior partner. Russia is isolated internationally, so they are focused on their alliance with China. They're selling natural resources to China. And China is very aggressively working online, as I lay out in Blood Money, and this recent Wall Street Journal report confirms. There is at least 1,000 Chinese military officers. All they do is go online, posing as Americans on places like Facebook and Twitter X, saying, terrible things about Trump or saying divisive things that are designed to rip the country apart. And yet the White House does not want to talk about that, and they don't want to really talk about TikTok either.
Yeah, that you know what I noticed today, Peter, from the press conference, and George, we were talking about this earlier. Yeah. He comes out, Garland says, "Oh, Russia did this. They're posting this on social media through RT Russia Today." And then, there's this little thing with Iran and this little thing with China. Now let's go back to Russia. Right. It was like a blip. I mean, it just seems so political to me.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, maybe George can comment on this too. The fact of the matter is the Russians are like a blunt force instrument when they try to do this. They're not subtle. They're not sophisticated. Right. It's easy to defect. The Chinese are much more sophisticated, and it's much more widespread than anything Russia's doing.
Absolutely. And also the Chinese are very long-term thinking, around the world. They're buying all the ports now. They're doing a lot of things, buying farmland. They're doing all this stuff. It's all a big plan. And this, we got to wake up. Both sides are going to wake up. The Democrats got to wake up and start pushing back on this. And
Judge Weinberg, real quick.
Peter, good to talk to you again. There's another problem. There's the infiltration. The infiltration, for example, in San Francisco, you had armed people in San Francisco going after pro-democracy opponents of the Chinese regime. So they were bought and paid for. There were Chinese in this country fighting their fellow Chinese, and these guys were on the payroll of the Communist Party of China. And nobody's talking about San Francisco being a war zone.
Yeah, no, Judge, that's a great point. And these are you've talked about this on this show before, too, these sort of secret police departments that the Chinese have used to sort of enforce the CCP line, especially against ethnic Chinese. There's one of those, by the way, in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, and it's run by a friendship organization. It's one of only 7 in the United States of these secret police stations. It cooperates with a group called Minnesota Global, which is close to Governor Walz. And so Governor Walz has criticized the police in the Twin Cities for their treatment of people. He's gone after law enforcement repeatedly. He has not said one thing about this Chinese police department that is operating illegally to intimidate people in China. People need to wake up about this and be honest about it.
Peter, that's your next book, to talk about the infiltration in this country of the politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's your next book there, Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. Great stuff. You got to come back on soon. We love having you on.
And anytime.
Thank you, Peter. And we're going to go to a break. And coming right after the break, well, which way are the markets going? I mean, the stock market's going up and down. We have Steve Moore coming on. And we have the numbers of how many people think that Kamala Harris is going to show up for the debate or not. Well, you ready for this?
No's are 54%.
54% say that she's not going to show up.
Yeah, she's going to have a whooping cough or something that day.
And 45% says she is going to show up.
Yeah, we'll see.
And don't forget,
go to WABCRadio.com and go to the poll and vote. Okay, let's go to that break.
A common sense recap of the day's biggest stories. It's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby. Cats and Cosby on 77 WABC.
Well, Steve Moore is with us today, and which way the market's going, I don't know. I bought one stock. My father only bought 2 stocks in his life, Con Edison and AT&T. Steve Moore, what the heck is going on?
Hey, John, good to be with you. I think there's goosebumps right now among investors about what Kamala Harris is talking about doing if she was to win the election. You've got an election which is pretty much close to a toss-up. I mean, Trump has a slight lead in some of those toss-up states, but it's pretty close to being an even race, although I think Trump will prevail. But I think investors are looking at, doubling the capital gains tax, John. That's what Kamala Harris has talked about, taxing unrealized capital gains, raising the dividend tax, raising the personal income tax rate. It'll make America very uncompetitive. The return on investing, if you invest, say, $1 million in
in a new small business, you make a return on it, you'd be paying over 70% tax rate on those earnings. So people aren't going to do it. And I just think there's a fear. And also remember, she's also in favor of all sorts of, green energy programs, Green New Deal. She's in favor of massive new spending, all of that stuff. I've called Kamala Harris the most anti-business candidate in my lifetime.
You know what I saw earlier today? This is interesting because she's getting incoming action from a lot of sides. This is Ro Khanna, congressman from California, came out. Did you see? Yes, he blistered her on CNBC. Right. Yeah, he said that her plan with the capital gains and the unrealized gains, he said would actually kill innovation and entrepreneurs in this country. That's stunning from a diehard Democrat, Steve Moore.
Well, what's so interesting is, like, an hour after he said that, guess what Kamala Harris said? She said, I'm not in favor of raising the capital gains tax. I mean, here's the thing. What does this woman stand for? I mean, John, you've known, Donald Trump for a long, long time. I've known him for about 10 years now. I mean, this is a guy who says what he means and means what he says. You may disagree with what he says, but he tells you as it is. Kamala Harris seems to I mean, I fell off my chair laughing when she said she's now in favor of building the wall. I mean, really? This is a woman who said it was the most dangerous idea she'd ever heard. So I think Americans are just disgusted with what a non-genuine politician she is who doesn't have any firm convictions. She says she stands by her values. I don't know what those values are.
Yeah, and that's why it needs to come out in the debate. I mean, it needs to be like, here's what you said. It's clear as day. She's on camera on so many of these opportunities saying these things, and then suddenly she has an epiphany.
If she has changed her mind, and look, sometimes, I change my mind. Everybody changes their mind.
Guess what? I change my mind, but I don't change it on 20 things overnight. and on major things like that. I'm sorry. I don't buy that.
No, but my point is, even if, on a few of these issues said, look, I've changed my mind. Okay, explain why you've changed your mind. Why did you say what you said before? And I think, Trump has to say, look, if I were, helping him this way, I'd say, well, I feel like I'm debating two Kamala Harrises, one who said one thing, one that said the other, because people want politicians who stick to their guns, who believe what they say what they mean. Trump does that. I don't know what Kamala, I think she will show up for the debate. I just don't know which Kamala Harris is going to show up for the debate.
So, in other words, you would vote that she is going to show up.
Oh, yeah. I think she will.
Let's see what happens. Judge Weinberg?
I have a bet with John. I say she shows up. I'm risking $1.
By the way, I did too. Okay. I did too. So we both may be rich.
$1 is my maximum bet.
Steve, I'll tell you what also troubles me. She has this whole proposal about taking over control of local land use and zoning by using federal money, superseding local and state regulation of land use and zoning. What that means is that they can destroy communities. So if a local community is hard pressed for dollars, take some federal money, and then you have to go along with the federal program.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that proposal, and I was shocked by it, frankly. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of zoning, but it should be local. The people in the community don't want a whorehouse down the street.
Imagine that.
What's that?
You can have zoning but there's too much zoning.
Wait, John wants to know what that is.
And I'm not against whorehouses.
I thought they were only in Las Vegas.
The oldest profession, after all.
They're legal there.
By the way, I did do a story at the Bunny Ranch, for the record, years ago. But anyway, go ahead.
But my point is, look, the people in the community should decide, what the town's going to look like, what's allowed, what's not, and not federal zoning permits. Because what they're going to do is they're going to make it harder and harder. The same people who say they want affordable housing are the people who zone housing out of they have all sorts of land restrictions in these cities, and it's caused people to be homeless because they can't build enough of the apartments. So I think it's a terrible idea. Those, in my opinion, those should reflect community values. Don't you think, Rita?
Yes, which is different than the whorehouses. So I'm glad we cleared that up.
It's only in Las Vegas.
That's right, only in Las Vegas. That's right.
They're in New York?
Yeah, Reno too. Reno too.
One last thing. City that has, I don't think you guys know this, Houston is a city that's famous for having very little zoning.
Is it Houston or Houston?
And it does fine.
Steve Moore, looks like electric cars are dying. It looks like it's either going to be gas cars or hybrids. I mean, why go in the middle of nowhere and have no place to get charged and have a battery that can blow up versus a hybrid. You either have gas or you have a electric car. And Volvo today, that was sworn they're going to make all electric cars by 2030. Volvo, or was it Volvo? And then Volkswagen. Yeah. All the V words. Yeah. I've started to reverse.
I mean, are there any car companies left that are just making EVs? I doubt it.
The one that's a subsidiary of, I forget who it was, General Motors?
Well, here's what's going on. You've summarized the situation pretty well. Americans, like their gas cars, but also there is a trend towards buying the hybrids. And you would think that the environmentalists would say, well, this is good. It's a step in the right direction. Hybrids have less emissions than do, all gas cars. But they don't. They're so absolutist that they're against hybrids, which is crazy because it moves in the right direction. But these are the same people who want net zero, close down every coal plant, close down every gas plant, close down no oil, no nuclear power. I think it's just an assault on energy. But I do think, I agree with you, John. I think the future is hybrids. My wife has one right now. She's charging it in our driveway. So she uses, Rita, the electric, hookup for when she drives around town. But if she has to go on a long distance, she uses gas. I mean, it's really, why do they oppose that, Rita?
Yeah. You know what? I can't imagine.
Right? Thank you, Steve Moore. We got to go to a break.
Thank you, Steve.
Keep fighting, Steve. Keep fighting. We'll see you soon. And let's, how about some hot news, Rita?
Absolutely.
It's the top news of the day, sponsored by Goya. Here's Rita Cosby.
And we'll give you some hot news. Okay, here, John, the Justice Department, as we said, here with Peter Schweizer and with George, is accusing Russia of trying to influence the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland, just like gambling in Vegas, John, Attorney General Merrick Garland detailed the Russian campaign to interfere with the election. He barely spotlighted Iran and China. And on some very sad news, you guys, 4 people are dead, 2 students, 2 teachers, and at least 9 are in the hospital after an active shooter event at a Georgia high school. It unfolded as classes got underway today at Appalachia High School in Winder, which is about 50 miles northeast of Atlanta. The suspect is in custody, and there are several reports that he is a 14-year-old. And those are the hot stories of the day.
You're commuting home with Katz and Cosby. Now, here's John Catsimatidis and Rita Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. Let's go right to Andy McCarthy, the former Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York. Lots of big Trump cases, Andy. First off, tomorrow, there's the hearing on the so-called January 6th case. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, you're talking now about
the Tanya Chutkan, the judge.
Chutkan.
Yep.
Yeah, I think at this point, Rita, what they're going to try to do, I mean, they have a new indictment, but as I understand it, former President Trump doesn't have to be present, so there won't be an arraignment on the indictment. And I think what the issue is at this point is setting up a schedule to do what the Supreme Court told her to do, which is to go through the charges in the indictment with an eye toward what evidence the government would put up to try to prove the charges, and first figure out which of the evidence implicates official acts of the presidency and which don't. And if you have official acts of the presidency, the second question that has to be asked is, can the presumption of immunity that the Supreme Court said presidential actions have, can that be overcome by other interest or other evidence? So a long story short, there's no way this case is going anywhere not only prior to the election, but prior to the inauguration of a new president, because no matter what Judge Chutkan does, President Trump will have a right to appeal because it'll still be an immunity issue, and that has to be resolved pre-trial.
What do you think, Andy, with the sentencing now? Because it's sort of like all eyes on this sentencing. Trump tried to bring that case up to the federal court, and I saw last night it got shot down. So for now it sits in Judge Marchand of New York's case. Those are the 34 felony counts. I mean, that's coming. It's this month. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, it's September 18th, and it's really insidious, Rita, because Judge Merchan should postpone the sentence. There's a pending immunity issue. It's not Trump's fault that there is. Trump objected to the introduction of the evidence involving his presidential acts in the trial, and Bragg's office, with the indulgence of Judge Merchan, put the evidence in, even though they should have known, because the Supreme Court was considering this very issue, that it might be very problematic. So, of course, now the Supreme Court has said not only is the president immune from prosecution over particular executive acts, but prosecutors aren't allowed to use as evidence official acts in order to prove other charges, which is exactly what happened here. So everyone knows there has to be an immunity litigation here. And even if Merchan won't dismiss the case or vacate the guilty verdicts because he's ruled Bragg's way the whole case, Trump is allowed to appeal that. So the sentencing should not happen until that is completely litigated. And what I think Merchan is trying to do is he's delaying his immunity ruling until September 16th, and then he intends to plow right ahead with sentencing on September 18th, which would frustrate Trump's ability to find a court to block Merchan from imposing the sentence, because he'll only have one business day to do it in between.
So let me ask you in layman's terms, you're saying that sentencing, regardless, because it's such a tight time frame for appeals and all that other stuff, do you still think that he may be sentenced to jail on the 18th?
Yeah, well, I think even more now, because it doesn't make any sense to me. Any good non-conflicted judge would recognize that you have an immunity issue, and therefore the sentencing shouldn't happen until the immunity is fully litigated. And what I see when I look at Judge Merchan is a judge who seems to be trying to find a way around that so he can get to sentencing. And there's no law enforcement reason that Trump needs to be sentenced prior to the election. The only reason to force that issue is obviously the partisan political issue that they want the Democrats to be able to say that Trump is a convicted felon facing a stiff prison sentence in the run-up to the election.
Wow, that's amazing. Andy McCarthy, Judge Weinberg.
I agree with that 110%, Andy. It's only a political decision. It's not a law enforcement. It's not a judicial decision at all. And Merchan should be ashamed of himself. I want to switch gears. I want to ask you your opinion about the fact that a year after the fact of the October 7th attack against Israel and the slaughter of all those people and the torture of all those people, now the DOJ wakes up and they decide they're going to file criminal complaint against Hamas and its leadership. What's that about?
By the way, the people that they named, there's only one who's alive. Yahya Sinwar. The other ones, Israel already took care of it.
Okay, so isn't that just yet another political gambit by the Department of Justice, Andy?
I think it's actually, I feel it's an effort to undersell my career, because if they had told me during my 20 years that I could indict dead guys, I could have run up the score big time, But Rita's right. It's 3 of the 6 that are named in the indictment are dead. And that's not an accident. At first when I saw that, I thought, well, maybe they had written the complaint and it was under seal with the court, and then the guys died and then they unsealed it, and that's how that happened. But that's not the guy. One guy, Marwan, was killed like 5 months ago by Israel. And Haniya, the former head of Hamas, the departed head of Hamas, he was killed 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the other guy Deef was killed like 2 weeks before that. So they did this on purpose. They actually put these dead guys in the complaint on purpose, and the other 3 are people who are unreachable because they're in Gaza or they're under the protection of Iran, either in Lebanon or Qatar. So this whole thing, I don't regard it as a charging instrument. I regard it as basically a press release. And the idea behind
it's a political gambit to show they're doing something.
To show that, basically to show Kamala Harris is really tough on Hamas and really tough on Iran. If you read, if you lived through the Obama years where we weren't allowed to say jihad and we weren't allowed to refer to the Muslim Brotherhood and all that stuff, to read this complaint is laugh out loud funny, because they're in there saying, Iran, they take all these jihadist organizations that are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood and they give them all kinds of funding. I'm like, who are these guys?
Right.
I remember these guys but Kamala is going to be the scourge of jihadist terrorism, at least for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good talking point for her at the debate. That was the first thing I thought about. Andy, thank you very much. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Keep us
Andy.
posted.
Thank you, Andy.
And you guys joining us now, we have Congressman Mike Lawler. He is on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, the committee just subpoenaed Antony Blinken for refusing to testify over Afghanistan, the dismal withdrawal. Talk about why this is so important right now. We still don't have any answers yet on what happened, who went wrong. No one's been held accountable.
Well, obviously, Rita, since we've taken over the House over the last 20 plus months, we have really worked to hold the administration accountable. We've held numerous hearings on the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan. Kamala Harris says she was the last person in the room with Joe Biden. Well, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden own this disaster that resulted in the death of 13 U.S. service members. And Kamala Harris still to today has not met with the Gold Star families. It is disgusting and disgraceful. And we have sought to hold this administration accountable. And Antony Blinken has testified previously, but there are still a lot of unanswered questions. The administration has refused to take responsibility, trying to blame former President Trump for the withdrawal. The reality is that the agreements that were negotiated were conditions-based. And Joe Biden should have recognized, he of 50 plus years of foreign policy experience, as he likes to tell everyone, should have recognized that the conditions on the ground did not permit the withdrawal that he engaged in. And we not only lost 13 U.S. service members, it resulted in the death of many. It resulted in hundreds of Americans being left. It resulted in thousands of Afghanistan interpreters and those who supported us during the war on terror being left in Afghanistan with the Taliban because of the way that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris handled it. And so we are trying to get to the bottom of it. We want answers. We have asked Secretary Blinken to come back and testify and answer more questions. And he has refused, citing his schedule. But the reality is the American people deserve to know the truth about this disastrous withdrawal.
Congressman Mike Lawler, I think about, too, obviously it was horrendous. And the loss of the 13 U.S. service members, there is no price on that. I mean, I think of their families so much who have come out and just have been heartbroken and haven't gotten, as you said, even a call from the administration. And yet you also think about what's happened around the world since then. I mean, we lost so much, I think, respect, sadly, around the world. People saw that we left our allies and left them high and dry in Afghanistan. And that, I think, has really caused, you look at, I don't think Russia would have felt as emboldened. You wonder what Iran's thinking. They're thinking America's going to walk away and leave equipment and leave it such a mess. There were so many repercussions after that withdrawal.
Well, the idea that we turned over an Air Force base and, $80 billion worth of equipment, this Air Force base within close proximity to China, our greatest geopolitical foe, and just stupidity at its highest levels. And obviously, Joe Biden's weakness and Kamala Harris's weakness as president and vice president has invited the crises that we have seen on the international stage. The Russians saw what happened in Afghanistan and recognized that the Americans did not have the will under Joe Biden to push back. And that's why you saw the invasion of Ukraine. And despite the fact, think about how stupid this is, Rita. Despite the fact that we are supporting Ukraine, we're spending billions of dollars. Europe is spending billions of dollars. You know what else Europe is spending billions of dollars on? Russian gas. Why? because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are opposed to domestic production of energy here in the United States. In addition, you look at what they've done with Iran. Iran was broke at the end of the Trump administration. And what did these jokers do? They lifted sanctions on the purchase of Iranian petroleum against China. So China has purchased 90% of Iran's oil, up over $100 billion over the last 3.5 years. That is the money that is being used to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Iran nuclear program. It is shameful what has happened on the world stage under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, and they have made us a laughing stock, frankly.
Yeah, sadly. I agree, sadly. And boy, as you point out, there are so many repercussions. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's take a break right now. And who do we have? We have Al D'Amato, Senator D'Amato, one of the greatest U.S. senators New York State has ever had. He's still fighting for our state. And let's take that break.
It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And we are back here on Katz and Cosby. We're just talking about this. No surprise. Jamie Raskin, Democrat, launching a probe into a closed DOJ investigation. They're saying, wondering if Trump took money from Egypt. Forgive me, Judge, wasn't there something with Hunter Biden and the Biden family?
They covered up for years and years and still covering up on the Bidens. This is an unfounded allegation against Trump. They're trying to create a scandal so they give her something to say rather than talk about her failed record at the debate.
Right.
It's more nonsense.
More politics. Let's go to Senator Al D'Amato. Senator Al D'Amato, your thoughts about this news? Come on.
Let me tell you, just a lot of nonsense, and it's a diversion. But I have to tell you something. Trump can and should win if he stays on message. The only person who can beat Trump is Trump. Stay on message. First thing you do is you say, I will secure the border, and I will deport the illegals, the criminals who have captured our city, and get rid of those who shouldn't be here. And let me tell you what I will do for the economy. Drill, baby, drill. Within the next year, the prices of oil and gas will be cut between 40 and 50%. You imagine that. Imagine fuel going back down to the $2 and change level. Do you know what that does to the economy? Do you know what that does not only to running your cars and the buses and transportation, but your energy at home? You know what that does to inflation? It puts money in people's pockets, money that they have been spending since the prices have more than doubled. I mean, it's great for homeowners. Every cost of living, including electric costs, goes down. It cuts the cost. So you secure the border, you drill, baby, drill, you get rid of the illegals, and you save America. And only Trump stands for that. This administration is watching our nation and our cities becoming destroyed. It's about time for people, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, independents, to stand up for the United States of America, not for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, or for our way of life. For crying out loud, don't you want it so that working people can live here, so that they can run their cars, run their businesses, heat their homes, pay their electric bills without seeing them to go through the ceiling? That's what's happening. Every politician should be in favor of this, whether he's a Democrat or a Republican. And Trump, instead of talking about nonsense, talk about this. Energy independence, secure the border, make our nation safe, and make it so American citizens, all of us, can live with pride and dignity and watch the economy over the next year improve dramatically.
I think energy independence is the most important thing for the United States of America. Between the United States of America and Canada and Mexico, North America could be energy independent and not depend on anybody. And right now,
secure the border, John. Secure
absolutely.
the border and get rid of the illegals. Make this country great. And if you don't stand for that, you shouldn't be running for office. And I say to Democrats, if you love this country, put politics aside. And the only person who can defeat Trump is Trump. You ought to stay on the message I've just articulated.
Well, President Trump is going to be in the city tomorrow. I'm going to be at the lunch with him, and I will deliver that message.
Recording for him, John.
I will deliver the message.
Deliver it. Play the recording and give him my best.
Now, Senator, real quick, also, what about the media's role in all of this? Because we're just getting word, by the way,
the media is against Trump.
That's my point. That is my point. He's going to be debating the moderators and Kamala Harris.
No, he's got to stay on this message. Don't get into the nonsense. Stay on this message. That's all you got to do.
I agree.
You got to say, I will secure the border. She hasn't done it, and she won't do it. I will deport the illegals. I will drill, and we will be energy.
No, I agree. We agree. We agree with you, Alphonse. The fact that the people around President Biden that were running things never secured the border.
Yeah, they had all the time.
And
they
the people
didn't.
around running Joe Biden's campaign, running Joe Biden's the White House, they're going to be running Kamala's White House. She does, there's no way to anybody else. So nothing is going to change. So if you want to have continued problems with the border, vote for Kamala.
Well, if you want this nation to be free and independent, if you want the cost of living to go down, I mean, she's got these giveaway programs. Where's that money come from? Working people, a bigger debt. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Get the cost of energy down.
It is. It would change, Senator, it would change everything. It would change everything. Senator, we love you. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With you.
And by the way, John, just getting word, too, that the Kamala Harris campaign has agreed to the debate with muted mics. Remember, those were the terms. They wanted an unmuted mic. They were trying to change the rules. She was flopping on that. Apparently, the word is she has agreed. So there will be muted mics at the debate next week.
So she may show up then.
We'll see. We'll see.
I'm feeling a dollar richer.
Oh, my God. Truth.
Justice and the American way.
God bless America.